BBC v Trump, it certainly isn't going away. Donald Trump's former Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, went on BBC Newsnight back in 2022 and warned that that wasn't the speech, that it had been edited incorrectly and gave the wrong idea what Trump actually said on that day. Here was that warning that the BBC didn't take heed of.
Your video actually spliced together the presentation. He said, we're going to go down and we're going to cheer on our senators and our House members. And then it actually goes on to say, in some of them we might not be able to. And that line about it, we fight and fight like hell, is actually later in the speech. And yet your video makes it look like those two things came together. That's the type of messaging here that so many people in my country find frustrating, is that it's hard to actually get the facts.
And joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Good to see you, Mick. So when you said that on BBC, what was the reaction of the hosts?
None whatsoever. And in fact, I had forgotten about it until Trump brought it up this particular week. But yeah, we had a long discussion about that. Interview actually goes on. And we talk about the importance of actually understanding the facts of what happened that day and what didn't happen that day. And if the media, in that particular circumstance, the BBC, is going to splice things together that are just false, it makes it really, really hard to have an intelligent conversation about that. Look, I'm not looking to relitigate January 6th. You know, I've talked about that a lot. This is about whether or not the BBC intentionally changed something to make Donald Trump look bad. Now, they could be forgiven for doing it on the first hand, right? Say, oh, my goodness, it was a mistake. But then I brought it to their attention, and they didn't change it for 3 years. I think that's one of the things that's at the crux of the dispute right now with the White House.
Yeah, so we're just reminding the BBC that they can't say they didn't know because you told them live on air, and there's proof of that we've just shown. So after you said that on air, the host didn't react. There was no follow-up from management, and they just shrugged it off. Is that pretty much what happened?
Yeah, in fact, I was in London just a couple of days ago when this story broke. You can imagine that was an interesting place to be. And there's some stories coming out about how some people inside the BBC said, my goodness, how did we do this? Does anybody, want to talk about this? And they didn't. They just moved on. In fact, when this story did break about 10 days ago, it took the BBC almost a week to respond to it now. So no, I think the BBC has just been completely incapable of admitting that they did something really, really wrong. And a lot of folks have lost their jobs for it. Maybe BBC will lose some money for it as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think, Mick, it's important to take stock in this conversation, just the influence the BBC has. Of course, not a lot of Americans watch the BBC, but that aside, the BBC around the world has a lot of influence. So, these people aren't going to vote for Donald Trump or vote against him because they don't live in America. But it does have an influence on, the framing of him, the framing of his presidency and what he actually stands for. The BBC, the most trusted news source, well, it used to be in the UK. And there's something like, I think, 40% of Britons that watch it. There is no channel in America that has that kind of share. I think the most is about 25 to 30%. BBC has world service as well, so it's been right across the Middle East, right around the world too. So that's why it's so important. A lot of people might be asking, why are we talking about the BBC so much? We're talking about its influence out of the UK and within the UK as well.
That's right. Nobody who watched this interview, although the BBC does have an outlet in America called BBC America. I cannot remember if that show broadcast here or not. But it's not the rank and file people watch this, Laura. To your point, it's world leaders watch the BBC. All around the world, people form their opinion in large part on Donald Trump based on what they see on television in their home countries. I'll never forget when I gave a speech in Norway right after the election. I asked about 100 people if they had thought that Donald Trump had a chance to win, and only 2 or 3 of them raised their hand. That's how biased some of the information that people see overseas is. And as it turns out this week, apparently the BBC was one of the leading voices with that bias. So I hope it gets worked out. It looks like some folks, again, have lost their jobs at the BBC. They've yet to apologize to the president, which I thought was a little strange. But again, maybe just shedding light on it is enough. The people know even the BBC at times can't be trusted.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's important for journalism per se that you have organisations like the BBC that can be trusted because there is a bit of a contagion effect here already. You know, Nigel Farage, who's polling higher than the Tories in the UK at the moment, wants to get rid of the BBC altogether. There's a possibility that he could become Prime Minister there. Anyway, let's talk about Epstein, the Epstein files. We've spoken about in the past, Mick, there is a difference between the files, who's in the files, and who's on the list. Two very different things. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump have now blown up deluxe. Explain the background to this.
Well, it doesn't take a lot of explaining. She was one of his biggest supporters for the last several years in Congress. I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody tighter with Donald Trump than Marjorie Taylor Greene. And one of the things that's so stunning to so many people is how quickly that relationship has fallen apart now that Marjorie Taylor Greene has essentially said she would like to see what's in the Epstein files. Again, go back. We've had some of this conversation before. I still don't understand why the administration is not being completely forthright about this stuff and producing all these materials. There's no way, Laura, that anything really, really bad about President Trump could be in there. If there were, the Democrats would have released it. Keep in mind, Joe Biden's Department of Justice had this file for 4 years. So it's very interesting to see that the divisions that are now cropping up within the Republican Party. This is the first time now in the second Trump administration that anybody really in the party, other than maybe one or two congressmen, has been willing to sort of go against what Donald Trump wants to do. Be curious to see how it plays out and whether or not it has a sort of a contagion into other issues beyond just these particular files.
Yeah, we've seen 20,000 documents dropped last week. You know, everyone's trying to make their way through those. But isn't this mutually assured destruction, really? You know, the Democrats might have a bit to lose depending on who's on the list and who's in the files, and Trump as well. So that's where the caution is.
Yeah, and that would sort of explain the circumstances, right? Are there high-ranking, say, friends of Donald Trump in the file that he doesn't want to embarrass? Okay, that might explain it. And at the same time, high-ranking Democrat friends of Joe Biden, which would explain why they didn't leak any of this out during the 4 years. So there's just more questions, and more questions get asked with every passing day. Anytime you look like you're not sort of for transparency, people start to wonder why. And again, I can't imagine there's anything bad in these particular files, but that's why I don't understand why the Trump administration hasn't just been completely forthright before now.
I think it's really interesting to see this split, not with Marjorie Taylor Greene per se, but with some of the MAGA base on some of the issues. On Israel, we've seen the likes of Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan split away from Donald Trump. Those same names away from the Israel, on the Epstein issue as well, sorry. And then you see, I know there's a lot of column mentions dedicated to this, the likes of Tucker Carlson interview Fuentes on his podcast over the weekend. What is going on?
Yeah, there's a real, we are a country of more than almost 350 million people with basically two parties. They're never going to be monolithic. And what the Republicans are discovering is that there's different opinions about some really, really dangerous things in there, like white supremacy and anti-Semitism. The Democrats have got the same sort of problem. So look, I just can't understand why so many people in the party are defending the white supremacist Nick Fuentes. The folks at the Heritage Foundation seem to be defending him. I don't get it. That's what if the Democrats are doing the same thing, we would be attacking them for it. Look, there have been some other issues, Laura, in addition to Epstein, where there's been a little bit of mutiny, not much. You mentioned Israel. There was a little bit of disagreement there with Donald Trump, a little bit on the late night talk show television host when Donald Trump came about that. But for the most part, the party is still very much in lockstep, and I'd be curious to see if Trump could keep that together now that we're really getting sort of in the run up to the midterm elections in 2026.
Yeah, we're in the run up already, are we? A year out.
That's how it works in this country. Yeah, we do it every 2 years, and really we do it about every 6 months. So.
Yeah, the cycle is very quick indeed. I'll be over there in no time. Mick, great to talk to you. See you soon.
Thanks, Alge.